Thank you. Well, here we are, Miss Zena James and myself, to talk about curiosity as one of the cornerstones of creativity today. And we're doing this a little bit differently. We are on Zoom, but we're also live streaming it. And we just continue to see what else we can figure out and how we can experiment. And so the plan today, just to go over sort of how we usually do this for those of you who are familiar, and I know a lot of you are very familiar. I've just got a real short screen share that'll introduce a few of our ideas at this stage about curiosity. And then we will have kind of an open-ended conversation about it. And if you have questions and you're on a platform where you can only type in the questions or the comments or your own observations, feel free to add those. And if you are with us on the Zoom platform, then of course we can use the raise hand feature, which is somewhere on your screen. It always varies based on what your device is. But if you look for reactions, most of the time you can find it there. And we're not opposed to someone who can't find that little yellow hand just blurting out and wanting to be sure you're included too. So we will be happy to have interruptions like that once we've looked at the screen share and we're kind of underway. Hope you can hear everything. And this is being recorded so that we can share it later. And while I'm getting the screen share ready, I think we should close his door.
Okay.
Because I'm hearing some sound in there. Why didn't it play? There we go. So some of you are familiar with this whole idea of the cornerstones of creativity. And essentially, when this occurred to me, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, a lot fell into place. And Zen and I have worked on this and talked about it a lot since then. Essentially, we see the cornerstones of creativity as being curiosity, which is what our focus is on today. And then the second one is clarity, because if you can reignite your curiosity, that helps you determine your preferences and that helps you become clearer about a lot of things. But in particular, as far as we're concerned, clarity helps us determine how we want to spend our creative time. But as I have found out, and as many members who have worked with me have found out, when we start to achieve some level of clarity, it actually impacts a lot of other parts of our lives too in a positive way. Then the third cornerstone is community, and they're all tied together, aren't they? Because when we achieve a certain amount of clarity, we're clearer about who we want to spend our time with and what relationships we would like to cultivate. And that can only be positive. It helps us recognize when there are relationships that we have that aren't necessarily helpful and can actually sometimes be a little on the sabotaging side. And so seeking community of like-minded, supportive, open, loving artists and friends is a worthy goal. And when we have worked on curiosity, and that's led to some clarity, and that's led to deliberate community, then lo and behold, we find that we're feeling more confident in a general sense. And so some of you may be new to these ideas, but I wanted to lay that overview out before we shared these few images with you, because one of the ways that you can look at each of these cornerstones is that it poses a problem that can be solved. And the problem for curiosity is that sometimes, for lots of reasons, we don't feel very curious anymore, and we're not particularly curious as artists. I remember being as impressed by Nancy Crow's artwork, The Quilter, as even more so, I think, by her profound level of curiosity. She wants to know how everything works and how all kinds of things relate. and how all kinds of things are made, even though she has a specialty. And so that's an example of what extreme curiosity can do to bring joy into your life, for starters. So we were thinking, we always sort of get started on an idea that we could explore that we're curious about. And it brought us back to, meaning Zena and myself, to this exercise from the Notan book. And I know you've heard me mention it before. And in that book, there's this exercise that takes an actual object and abstracts it. And there are rules. So in this particular case, you see some examples of the things that we worked on last week when we were iced in. So here in this one of mine, you can see on the right a salad fork. And you can see how I recreated the salad fork in the bottom rectangle and then went on to think of it as something that was rubber or a balloon that I could blow into in order, or I could stretch and make thin. And so that's the whole point of this particular exercise, is that it encourages us to be curious about how a particular tool can be morphed in some way. And it's also a great exploration of positive and negative space, which of course is what Notan is all about. The dark light principle of design is just another way of saying that the negative space in any composition, and that would be your quilts or your stitcheries or your ceramics or your mixed media, the negative space plays an important role too. And so how can we be curious about that? And so here's my bulldog clip in the bottom right corner and the way I abstracted it and stretched it and pulled it to fit into these other boxes. And here's one of Zena's. So you could talk about yours, Zena.
I think what stuck with me from this exercise was the dark light principles. And in the last chapter, which maybe we should share, of the book where it describes this exercise, they go on to talk about, after completing, 4 or 5 of these, even more, you start to look at the world in a different way too. Mm-hmm. And you begin to notice how the things you see in your environment are not just created for you visually by the lines of them themselves, mm-hmm. but how they're spaced next to other things. Mm-hmm. And I love that idea. Just looking mm-hmm. out at a landscape, for example, and the trees, and you can focus on that positive space. Mm-hmm. But the total composition that you're looking at is really created by that negative space too. And so doing these, I thought, because I read that chapter first before I started cutting and doing this exercise, and I just kind of kept that idea with me as I was working. So that was a laundry clip, and then here's a brayer. And cool. Yeah.
So did you have any negative voices happening when you were doing this?
Always.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot there. What sort of, because even in everything we know, the committee rears its ugly head. This is how the child in us and the curiosity in us gets sort of tamped down.
Yeah.
And I was feeling it for sure, because I hadn't done the exercise in a long time. And I was definitely hearing the little voices that were like, well, it's not really looking that great right now.
Yeah. Well, going after you, I think I kept looking behind my shoulder at the ones you had done. So I had a little bit of inspiration, which helped actually.
Yeah. Oh, good. I thought you were going to say I was on your committee big time.
No, I mean, you can be, but
I don't want to be.
You weren't. It actually helped.
Good. Good.
And yeah, I really, since we've been talking about all of these ideas preparing for this, I really tried to stay with that beginner's mind, the idea of the beginner's mind. I've never done this before. So if they looked crappy, they're gonna, what I shouldn't expect more at this stage.
It's good you can live in a place which is all about curiosity, and the child really is living in a place where you're not going to judge it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just put in a few more, and you can't play this game because you already know what most of them are. You'll recognize them. But another cool way to cultivate child mind or curiosity, I think, is to literally take your phone. We almost all have one, and if not, then a camera, and walk around in your house and take 5 pictures of things that change when you look at a detail shot.
Mhm.
So I originally thought, and we didn't have enough time to do this today in a 1-hour live stream, but I originally thought I'm going to put up 9 of these and have a game where people guess what they are before they actually see what they are. So here's the close-up of this. And I also want to say that from the standpoint of curiosity, when I've been doing this sort of thing for a pretty long time, in case it's new to somebody, this is such a great way to get your own composition going, to be curious about how this could be translated into something that could be turned into a quilt, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So this is literally bottle caps, and this chain 8 feet long, do you think it is?
At least, yeah.
I found it in a resale store, and this is what they call tramp art. And all of these bottle caps were put together on wire in order to make this long sculpture that I just love as much as I love anything I own.
We open up the chat. I do want to monitor the chat.
Sure.
Yeah, you can just pull that over to the side.
Okay.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, Ingrid, Henry Moore for sure.
Yeah.
Positive and negative space.
Yeah.
And Angie guessed right away. There you go. See, it would have made a fun guessing game.
Yeah, well, it can be.
Well, okay. Maybe we'll do this at my birthday party on the 14th.
Yeah.
I think it's fun. Oh, it went backwards instead of forwards. There we go.
Oh, I don't know that one. Anybody have a guess?
You want to put that on the other side?
There's a feather.
Feathers.
You're right. There's a feather there.
Nice.
Pearl.
So here we have a ceramic. I have a large collection of ceramics. So we have 2 ceramic pieces and a swan's feather. And I've got to tell you, I don't know, this is a curiosity story in and of itself. In 2010, I was in the UK. That's the last time I was there. And I went to a flea market. And while a friend was buying a bunch of musical instruments in this booth, I got to talking to the shop owner. And he had all these white feathers in a vase behind the counter. I said, I love those feathers. And he handed me one. And he said, now you own something from the Queen. I really hope my UK friends get to be in on this presentation and hear this story. Because I said, what do you mean? And he said, all of the swans that live in the park around Buckingham Palace belong to the Queen. And I go walking in the park, and when the swans drop their feathers, I pick them up and I bring them back here, and I usually sell them to people. But I'm giving this to you, so don't lose it and treasure it, because now you own something that used to belong to the Queen. And I felt like a little kid being given the most amazing gift.
That story blew Zira's mind, my 5-year-old.
Oh, I told her that story
yeah.
recently, yeah. Yeah, she picked it up much more carefully.
Yeah, she did.
A real queen. I don't know why it keeps doing that. It must be our program. Okay, guessing here. Those look a little grody. What was that guess?
Chair seat,
Chair
Ooh.
seat.
breadboard.
Chopping blocks, yeah.
Boards, yeah.
Cutting board.
Cutting boards. So you could really have some fun with this. And, for those of you who are in CST, we actually, in the first month, we're going to talk about, over the course of CST, we're going to talk about all the elements that contribute to making abstract work. And line is one of them. So I was thinking about that when I took this particular picture, the line of the ends of those boards. I guess it's okay to see the end again. If anybody gets this, I'll be shocked.
Twigs.
Basically right, but it's a broom. It's a handmade broom that I bought in Asheville, North Carolina, that hangs on the wall. Zira can't keep her hands off this either.
No.
And I just thought, I'm not sure. Obviously it's on the wall. I'll never sweep anything with it, but it was so lyrical. And I think one of the things, like, this would be so worth paying attention to yourself, is when you're drawn to something, as I was drawn to this, at least for me, it's definitely the curiosity and the childlikeness of it that makes me want to have it. I don't care a whit about sweeping the floor.
Yeah.
I just love that somebody turned that into a broom.
And it's from the Folk Art Center.
Exactly. It is. Recognize it.
Yes.
And who's commenting on the tree in the background? That is a pencil plant, and they're native to Mexico. So it's indoors right now, but it all fits together pretty well in this this composition. There it is again. And then I have, oh, yikes, we could be here all afternoon. I have loads of photos like that because once you get going, they're so much fun. But I just wanted to share 2 more samples where I literally took that close-up of the broom. And in this case, I put it in PicMonkey and I turned it into a line drawing. So if I was thinking of translating that into some other image, what would I do? You know, I've started calling play research, because everybody has trouble with giving themselves permission to play, but nobody seems to have any problem with doing research.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've got here is the basic outlines that could be turned into something else, and I didn't go any further with it because it's a short conversation we're having, but you see where this could go. And there's the same image once it was posterized. So I'm wondering, when's the last time you were curious? Or you should be asking me these questions. I'm always putting you on the spot just because I open my mouth faster.
No, that's okay. I think since we've been talking a lot about abstraction and we're going to focus on that in CST this year, doing the NOTAN exercise was such a great introduction to thinking about how to even begin working abstractly, because that's something I've been curious about for a long time. I love abstract work, but kind of where does it come from, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's different for every artist.
Mm-hmm.
But beginning with something tangible that we recognize in real life and stretching and then noticing the lines and the value and the shape and playing with that first is such a good way to kind of just jump in and be curious about kind of abstraction as a whole, because I think it can be so intimidating, for me at least, I'm curious about tons of things, but then breaking those things down to something that feels like I can research, or something smaller that I can actually learn. Besides, abstract art is a very large, huge concept.
Yeah, well, as we know from the lecture a couple of weeks ago, who knew it existed on such a large continuum? But from the other standpoint, I'm thinking about, because of what you said just now, about shifting the perspective a little bit and talking about if someone is sitting, I mean, I've been there. I don't know about you. You're younger, and I don't know about you. I can't speak for you. But I know that there have been times when I felt like my well was completely dry.
Yes.
And I was afraid that every creative idea I had was gone and had dried up. And I think, I ran across this term this week, aesthetic malnutrition.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, that's a really interesting way to think about it. And it comes from this idea that, and boy, do we know this, we all know this right now. Despite the pandemic, things seem to have sped up instead of slowed down. And we get ice and the little girls are out of school. And you would think that would slow everything down so we could go back to little girl speed. But instead, we feel we feel it's a detriment because it doesn't allow us to move at the fast pace that we're used to moving at. And that only points out that before everything was mechanized, and that's before everything was digitized, we could only move at the speed of what our bodies or an animal could do.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to engage with the world and actually experience the world at a slower pace. And in that same article that I think we both read, it said, what do we do as adults? We still have this storehouse of childhood impressions and experiences and the whole library of ways through taste and touch that we came to know the world. But because we're adults, we're expected to scan. So we just scan everything. So I think the example that we read was that if I say to you, how long is that table? You can scan the table and say, well, that table's about 5 feet long. But if I say, how many imperfections are there in the edge of the table? You would put your finger against the edge and close your eyes and run your finger along the edge and count every time you felt an imperfection. And that's the speed that curiosity often happens best at. I didn't say that very well, but does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I think, and in my own experience, when I've figured out how to slow down, it's really can be really difficult. I spend some time playing / researching something, and I get into it and it's really fun and I'm enjoying it. And then I kind of look up maybe like a couple months later and I've created some really cool things or made progress with whatever the topic was that I was originally interested in, because I connected, I slowed down and I wasn't so aware of the value of the act in the terms of productivity or money, to be completely honest. Like how, like with my job, I felt like other outside, especially when I was had a more traditional job, I felt in tech coding, I felt like kind of slowing down and drawing or doing other activities that weren't necessarily developing my technical skills weren't as worthwhile because I wasn't growing the skills that would pay. Right?
Yeah, it's pretty much it.
So yeah, but refocusing and slowing down and doing some of these art tutorials and things just brings me so much more peace and inner calmness.
Well, it's a self-care.
Totally. Yeah.
But I think the other thing that you've pointed out here that's worth taking a bit further is that we're back to that idea that if it's sacred creativity, meaning just for yourself, and your curiosity is only because you want to be inside yourself and understand something better, that there's no value on it. It's like, okay, this has always aggravated me so much that there was this false division between professional artists and the demeaning term hobbyists. I hate that fucking term because we figured this out when we started talking about the dilettante. The dilettante is also one of those words that's gotten twisted up. There are a lot of English language words that not necessarily start as English language, but have been twisted up to have a meaning that is dismissive and demeaning. And I think that's what you're describing, is that these activities, which is why we have to slow down. And somebody said, what was that term? The other term was aesthetic malnutrition, comes from being unable or forgetting. I think it's more forgetting. If we know that as children, we were born to be curious and we were born to be artists, and gradually over time, for whatever reason, we forget that that's the birthright that we have, then we also get into a place, we may not even buy into it deliberately, but we get into a place where we start discounting things that aren't going to have some positive outcome or production. And so that's why I'm so unhappy with how hobbyist has come to be a label that people are embarrassed to have. Instead of saying, yeah, I do this because I love it and it brings me joy, and I don't have any interest or desire in turning this into something that produces money.
Yeah.
That isn't why I'm here. I'm here because of the sacredness of what I do and how it changes my relationship with everything around me.
Right. And a couple people are
Oh.
saying in the chat, Shannon, paradoxically slowing down will help with self-care, will help with the tech skill development, or sub in any other skill that's
Mhm.
related to your job or how you make money that
Mhm.
maybe is not necessarily in the creative
Mhm.
field, although we think creativity
Well-
is just connected to everything.
Well, it's a balance thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a balance thing. If all you ever do is work, and you never have, and you neglect self-care, whatever that means, then you're definitely out of balance. And when you're
Right.
out of balance, you're usually not very happy.
Right. And that just translates, like
Screws
ripples
everything-
out into
yeah.
the rest of
It screws
your
everything
life.
up.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, so we kind of got, it's all fine. I'm not sure we had a track to get off, but in any event, so let's talk about ways that you can cultivate curiosity. And how do we learn things? And one way, so I've got a whole list because this is in the short handout that we prepared, that we made available for anybody who wants to download, right?
Yeah. And if it was in the email we sent out, but if you're watching this and want to find that, you can go to janedunwald.com, and under About, there's a Creativity of Cornerstones page there. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see you can download this handout that we're talking about.
And before we move on, I see a question from Teresa. Please, Teresa.
It's not so much a question, but what you were saying about, well, let me just backtrack. In my line of work, I'm retired now, but when I was working, everything had to be very precise. I was in nursing, so it couldn't be, creative nursing or, really that. So now when I'm doing my artwork or my quilting or my sewing, I tend to focus on it and look at it in this rational way and saying, oh my God, this stitch is not perfect. Oh, I can't, I'm not good. And this is what's really, and I've gotten to the point where sometimes I'm just kind of weary or leery about trying anything because it's not going to be that perfect, the way it looks in a book or whatever. So this is where I think a lot of my hesitation to try things, or my, not fear really, but my hesitancy to really push myself because I'm afraid it's not going to be right. That's where I'm coming from. And that's what I need to help get over, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's my take on that. And I know I'm right, because I'm not always right about everything, but I think in my years of experience, I might be right about this. And I am seeing a number of faces on the screen who have studied with me off and on for a long time, so they can call me up short if I'm wrong. But the way I always phrased what I taught was that you have to be, it helps to have a clear idea of what the assignment is. What do we expect to get from what we're doing right now? And I had fancy words for it that aren't coming to mind right now, but there was always a point to the exercise, and then there were other things that could happen. And so, if I was going to show somebody how to dye, I would definitely show people what I knew to be best practices for dyeing, immersion dyeing fabric. And then there might be variations that people would pursue, and sometimes it might work out okay, but there was always a culmination of the exercise that could achieve what we were after. And then there were all the other variables that could happen. And in general, I think, we'll talk about clarity next Friday. In general, you can be clear about how to do something and get it right, but artists are curious about what will happen if you do it differently. And part of that, all of that, it goes better if you embrace the idea that artists don't really see good or bad.
Mhm.
They only see what's inappropriate. So if we're talking about quilting stitches, in this case, if I'm making a functional bed quilt that I want people to sleep under for 50 years, then that dictates or it doesn't dictate, but it can influence the fabrics that I choose and the length of my stitches because it needs to be functional.
Mhm.
And I think one of the downsides of textiles is that most textiles have their roots in functional objects that had to last a long time.
Mhm.
So the stitches had to be really small and even.
Mhm.
And so as an artist, one of the things that we want to shift that perspective slightly so that we're no longer judging whether something's good or bad, as much as we're thinking, is it appropriate for what I'm doing?
Okay.
And another way to think about that, Teresa, that might help is that, we frequently, and I'm thinking of my friend Jo, who probably isn't here today because she works during the week, but she's a master gardener and horticulturist and helps people plan these elaborate gardens. And we all have had the experience of going out to pull weeds. So weeds are inappropriate in some settings, but when I drive out in the country, the same weeds I pulled out of my garden make a beautiful landscape.
Mm.
And so it's all about the context. And that means that if your stitches aren't perfect, you're making art. You're not making a bed quilt, as far as I know.
Mhm.
And even if you are making a bed quilt, there's a lot of leeway when it comes to what perfection is. And one of the things that we'll talk about at length, and many of us have talked about already, and sometimes you think, well, could you ever talk too much about the saboteur? I don't think so. Because perfectionism is one of the qualities that infiltrates our ability to be curious and to embrace our childlike natures. And we were not born as saboteurs. This is something that we learned and modeled, whether we're sabotaging ourselves or whether other people are sabotaging us. That's frequently, that's what shut curiosity down, is that
Yeah.
we weren't willing to go there anymore because we didn't want to be wrong and we didn't want it to be less than perfect.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
So
Thank you.
you're welcome. What I would really love to do is propose that each of us find some piece we're working on right now that we're unhappy with and do the worst possible thing to it. Totally screw it up. Do it completely wrong and just say to the saboteur, see, I can do any damn thing I want. I'm a grown-up. And
Sounds like fun.
yeah, exactly. Because sometimes that's where as soon as you free yourself up in that way, that's where the best stuff comes from. Because you're not judging anymore. Judgment is that kind of shadow judgment is the worst, and it kills curiosity. Like,
Yeah.
bam, the hammer comes down.
Okay. Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. I'm glad you're here. Lucy.
Yeah, in response to Teresa, check out the book by Brene Brown called The Gift of Imperfection.
Mhm.
That may help you get through some of the struggles that you're currently having.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
you-
haven't read that one yet, but I'm currently reading a few other Brene Brown books. I love them.
Yeah.
Highly
Can
recommend.
someone put the title and author in the chat?
Yeah.
Sure, I can do that.
Thanks, Lucy. So, other ways we learn. Well, here, I made a list. Here, when you want to cultivate curiosity intentionally, the following advice is helpful. I think this is in the handout we made.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask dumb questions. Don't be afraid to admit you don't know something. When you recognize you don't know something, go look for the answer. I was always big at acting like I knew the answer.
You still are.
Oh, God. Why, thank you.
You know almost all of the
I
answers.
know a lot of answers, but I don't know everything. And I don't mind being called out on it too, because, somebody once said to me, you're getting a little big for your britches. And at that point, it was an insult, but sometimes it's easy to get a little big for your britches.
No,
So
I-
it's always worth it to
I
have
wouldn't
somebody
go
kind
that
of
far.
remind you. Because it's related to the next one. Don't be afraid to be wrong.
Yeah.
I think when we go around acting that we know how everything works and we just, oh yeah, sure, I know how that, it's because we're afraid to be wrong because our self-worth is tied up with always knowing everything. It's so damn tiresome to be a know-it-all.
Yeah. I just sometimes when I get in that mindset where I feel like my perfectionism, because I feel like it's my worst trait, it shuts down so much. And I'm just now starting to kind of fight it a little bit. But I think about, like, for example, the painters who, like, there wouldn't be any of the last like 6 big movements in painting if there hadn't been one person that did it differently, and then probably years and years and years of people saying that, well, that's terrible, that's a terrible painting.
Yeah.
And then it just spreads and spreads, and more painters paint that way, right? So there had to be someone doing it wrong at some point.
Or defying, I mean, the rebels.
Right.
The rebels were the ones, and you know, kids can be like that too. It's all related.
And it's still happening now. I mean,
Well,
in
sure.
art.
That's what keeps art alive.
Right.
That's what keeps it all cycling around.
Yeah.
But you're
So-
right. It takes somebody whose curiosity and childlike rebelliousness to just say, well, you know, maybe nobody ever did paint in some impressionist way, but that doesn't stop me from doing it.
Right.
Or fill in the blank with the other good examples you had there.
Yeah.
Cheryl, glad you're here. But you're muted. Cheryl, unmute.
Sorry, being a perfectionist has been a real problem that I have had. And so over the last couple of years, I've really been working on trying to get over that. And I think one of the reasons I kind of got like that is seeing in the work area, there's so many people that just slop things together. They're trying to fix things, do their job, and they're lazy. They don't want to do a good job. And you see all kinds of stuff that's just terrible. Things don't work. And I think that's one thing that had gotten me, like, you know, you need to put some effort in the job. And I got to the point of everything has to be absolutely perfect, but I am working on getting over that. And one thing with quilting, where I used to rip so many things out and do stuff. What I do now is I look at it and say, can I live with that? And if I can, it stays. And most of the time, I don't take it out, hardly ever. If something's put together, you know, unless it's really, really bad. But you know, most of the time nobody notices anything that's, you have a point cut off. So what? Nobody notices these things. So that's been something I've had a problem with. But in the last couple of years, I've really, really been working on trying to overcome that.
Yeah, good for you. Cheryl, we had another Cheryl, and I'm sorry about that. I should realize when there is more, there's always more than one Cheryl in the room, but please, Cheryl, I know your hand's not up, but please feel free to speak.
I was just a little surprised when you called on me, not realizing there were other Cheryls. So my apologies.
No worries. No worries. I'm glad you're here. Yeah. I had an idea, but now it's gone. Karen. They usually,
Yeah.
Get it.
Okay, so for all these years, I have been blaming my mother for giving me this mandate that I had to always be productive. And it was to the extent actually that she didn't think reading was productive. So she would fuss at me when I was reading because I wasn't doing anything. But now I'm really starting to realize way more people than my mother felt that way. And it's kind of a Western culture that you always have to be productive. And so the playing is, it has been, I'm getting so much better at it, but it has been a real challenge for me. Sometimes it's hard for me to sit and knit, even though I'm making something. But I just wanted to share that this idea of always having to be productive is really from our Western culture, is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we can let go of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, well, I think we have to, that's probably not the right word to use, but I think letting go of it is a really important thing to think carefully and slowly about, because, you read this all the time, that when people are at the end of their lives, how often they comment, if somebody even bothers to ask, the comment is often, I just wish I had slowed down and had more fun. And I don't think fun is related to being professional or being a hobbyist or being a dilettante or any of that. Fun is mainly just learning to embrace your curiosity. We're back to that again in your child, and at least part of the time go for it and not care. Kids don't care whether they're productive or not. Kids just can while away hours and hours and hours and hours. And we may not have that luxury, but we can embrace a few minutes of it.
Mm-hmm.
Beth.
Well, I'm just, I'm playing right now with some of the exercises that I think are on finding your own voice, your book, and working on some of the notan cutouts and all of that, and trying to take a break and relax. And I'm finishing a piece right now for to hopefully get into a show. And I'm relatively new to the whole thing of art quilting and quilting in general. I've been sewing for many years, but I've never quilted until last year. And holy moly, the learning curve on doing some of it is harsh, and I'm trying to learn how to do free motion stitching and, getting stitch lengths and, all the stuff with getting the tension even. And I struggle, as many people do, I guess, on dealing with trying to be creative and then trying to do good work, the perfectionism thing, but even the thing of just trying to do nice work. And in my case, since I've never really seen art quilt in person, just trying to understand what they are, what they should look like and everything. And I realized that, I used to really not allow myself to walk away from pieces until they were what I thought of as being fully resolved or perfect enough. And I'm starting to realize with, learning the art quilt things that I will be working on a quilt for the next 10 years if I do that to myself. And so I'm trying to do the same thing one of the earlier speakers was saying about letting go of perfectionism, but I'm also trying to say to myself, I'll fix it next time. It's like I learned something and I think, okay, these removable pens that come off with heat apparently don't always come off with heat, or maybe if you leave them on for too long, they don't come off. And I look and I think, okay, I could go crazy trying to figure out how to paint over it or cover it up or do something else. Or I could just look at it and say, okay, I'll fix that the next time, or my stitch lengths, vary wildly. And sometimes my tension goes haywire. And then, one line will have a chunk in the middle where the tension is just messed up. And I think, am I really going to tear out 2 inches to get it right? And I think, no, I'll just keep learning about tension and I'll fix it next time. And actually, it's made it, easier to sort of focus on the creativity, but it's also made it easier to do more so that I do get better at it over time. If you keep redoing the same 2 inches over and over again, really, that's not about learning or, developing good techniques or doing anything else. And so, I don't know. I mean, I guess, that all I'm thinking is that, sometimes letting yourself play while you're even in the middle of a piece that you're going to try to get into something or show to people is not a bad thing. I think about paintings, and I have a painting background, and in paintings, you'll often look at them up close and you can see the pencil lines that somebody did or the drawing showing through, and you can see where somebody corrected something or made a change because they were getting creative while they were working on it. And I was looking at my pen lines and thinking, well, what if instead of just thinking of them as horrible mistakes, I can just think it's the underdrawing showing through a little bit. It's okay for that to happen. So anyways, I guess, one way is trying to look at your mistakes differently. And the other thing is just thinking, letting go of fixing everything in one piece and just thinking, I'll keep that in mind next time and worry about it then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks.
I love that quote Cynthia put in the chat. Picasso said, art is never completed, just abandoned. I really like that.
This other one is really good too. Let's see where to go.
Lots of good ones.
If you wouldn't see the mistake.
It's also one way of leaving behind judgment too, that we were talking about, is just putting off being judgmental because it's hard to not be judgmental. And you say to yourself, oh, I'm not going to be judgmental, but you are. So in a way, it's kind of like, when I quit smoking, the only way I was ever really able to stick with it was I never told myself I have quit for good. I just tell myself I'm not going to smoke right now. And I've told myself if I hit like 90 and I want to take up smoking again, I can do it. But it's kind of like putting off the judgment and not just telling yourself you're not going to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to quote this from Val Thorson. Robin Atkins, who apparently teaches beading, I'm not familiar with her, would say, if you don't see the mistake riding by on a horse, you don't need to fix it. That's a good one. Thanks. Denise.
Well, this whole conversation reminds me of something I used to do back in another part of my life when I wasn't making things. I was making songs and I was singing in clubs. And every time I would start a gig, which required that I look forward into the future, by at least 6 weeks, and that I involve my band, which was 5 guys, and that I invite an audience, which was where I lived in Chicago. Every time there would be a moment where I'd be totally freaked out about doing this. So what I used to do, and I'm reminded now that I need to do this now, just in a new modality, is I would make a notebook for each gig. And I would put because I like order, so I would put like little tabs in it, and there would be one for the information about everybody's name and phone number. No email then, that was pre-email. The date of the gig, whatever I needed to do in terms of information to people, the set list, what songs I wanted to sing. And then I had a whole tab section that I would put that was titled Reasons Why This Will Completely Not Work. And I would put down like, I am not talented. I will forget my words. The bass player will be drunk. The piano player will have a car accident on the way and not get there. The bartender will make a blender drink while I'm singing a ballad. The audience hates me. Who am I kidding? Why am I even doing this? So I would just dump all this stuff. And it was so freeing because of course, this was the committee. We just didn't know that then. But I had all these thoughts. And it's like, by having a place to put them, it honored them in a particular way. It honored my fear, which is what I needed to feel. It was all just fear, but also it got rid of them because when I put them down there, they weren't controlling me. It was just a little tab, a nice, neat little tab, but it's just a little tab. And then I'd do the gig and everything will be fine. And I'm so happy to be here today. That's all.
Well, I think you've just given us all a new worksheet.
Yeah. I'm going to do that for sure.
And I'd only add one more thing, which is once you get all that written down, burn it and just let it go.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. And I just want to share what Mary wrote. If I ask a child who's deeply involved in play, what are you doing? I know she's really in creative flow when she says nothing. because I had that experience of asking Zira several months ago, what are you painting? Because she was really into painting. And she looked at me like I was crazy. And she said, I'm just painting. I thought, yeah, that's good enough, right? Daryl, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. This is an incredibly appropriate topic for me, but in a different way. So the last 6 weeks I have spent doing exactly the things that we're talking about here, but in a very different way. At the end of December, I had an accident. I fell and I fractured my shoulder. Which was really, life-changing for the moment. I will recover eventually, but I had all these wonderful plans in the studio of what I was going to be doing all of January: dye pots, weaving, all these. I'm a weaver, and weaving is very physical and takes the use of both arms, or so I thought. What happened once I got over the first 48 hours of, oh my God, I can't take enough Percocet, was I was able to rethink how I did everything, every single step, including walking into the studio. I had to rethink, distill it down to the most basic steps. What do I need to do to accomplish this? I want to dye things. How do I wind a skein with one arm? And then how do I wind a skein with one arm and 3 fingers hanging out of the sling? And it has been actually an incredible gift to be able to go through the motions that we completely take for granted through our lives, of all the skill sets that we have, and go back to, how do I now do this and accomplish this with a disability? And I have to say that the last 6 weeks, as painful and difficult as they've been, have been a gift, because I've had to rethink every single movement into the smallest bit that I do in my life, including making bacon, which I was doing 2 days after I fell. I was making bacon. And it is right. And yeah, Angie just popped up. Yes. And as our bodies age and change, assuming we don't have stupid accidents like falling over a curb, we have to rethink even our movements and how we can get, and it has been a great lesson. Anyway, I will mute myself now, but there's something to think about.
Thanks, Daryl. Well, I hope you're on your way to a speedy recovery.
Speedy is not the operative word here. It's going to be about 4 months to get back what I had.
Okay.
But I am moving each day, maybe another half an inch more. So and I have to be patient. That's hard. Patience does not come easily to me.
No, we know each other. Well, speedy was the wrong choice of words. I hope it's a full recovery. Maybe that's
that is my goal, and I want as much. And I said to him, I want as much rotation and movement as I need to do what I love and what I want. That's all I'm asking. I'm not a dancer. I'm not an ice skater. I need just to do what I need to do or want to do. Sometimes they blur.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Pamela.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this and all of your classes so much. But I heard Karen talk about her mother expecting perfection. And I guess I grew up with a mother who felt that art was not a valuable asset. It was something to do in your free time if you had nothing else. And so whenever I was doing art, she would say, don't you have something else to do? And even though I loved my art classes in school, I did not major in art because it wasn't a valuable career. So it's been a long time. I'm retired and I can't get into I have this wonderful art room and I can't go into it until I clean the house, cook the food, wash the dishes. And I just can't get past this hump that is keeping me from spending all my time there or doing it.
Mhm.
I
I used to do that.
Yeah.
If I don't mind, can I say something, Jane?
Sure, Michelle, please do. Please.
I used to do a lot of that until my first year of CST, and now I allow myself 1 hour to do whatever I need to do in the house, and then go into the studio.
Mhm.
And it helps.
Wow. It takes a while, doesn't it,
It
Michelle?
does.
Doesn't
Yes.
happen- It's not going to happen tomorrow.
No, it takes a while. It does.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, you reminded me of the story, the man who, when I was growing up, there was a children's book called The Man Who Never Did His Dishes. And he lived alone and he ate off all his dishes and he kept putting dishes in the sink and dishes in the sink. And then he started eating out of ashtrays. And then he started eating out of empty potted plant containers. And then I don't know what he did after that, but eventually every dish in the house was dirty. And then he backed a pickup truck up to the house and he put all the dishes in the pickup truck and it rained. And then he put them all back in the cupboards, which is questionable behavior. But I think there's something to be learned from this, the baseline about what's really important.
I understand the logic.
I know you do.
Get past it.
Yeah, I really struggle with that too. I
works
can
for you?
rationalize it and say, this is self-care. I need to do that to feel good. And I'll find myself doing any other thing in the house that I can to stay away from
Mhm.
it. It's like the vulnerability that you experience in making art is terrifying. And
Well, it doesn't help to have those tapes running through your head from someone as influential as a parent.
Mhm.
And we can all understand from a logical standpoint why our parents were the way they were.
Sure.
What motivated it, and we can forgive them to the best of our ability. And then maybe the best thing is just increments, Pamela. Just, okay, I'm going to do this for 10 minutes.
Mhm.
And you could flop it around too. Michelle has eventually come over 2 years to give herself an hour to get that stuff done. But you could just as easily give yourself 15 minutes to do something creative first, open-ended, and then go back to the cleaning up. Mainly, the way I think of that, having been a major in psychology, is that we have to trick that part of our brain that thinks logically by coming up with these strategies that bargain with the brain and say, well, I know where that all comes from. And I'm going to intentionally do this right now. And
Pamela, I just wanted to tell you, I used to have a huge and I still kind of have a huge problem with that too. And I'm not even great at keeping my house clean, but I can find almost anything to do that I need to do right, before I go do this. I found like sometimes it's breaking habits too. And I found sometimes one thing that I find really helpful is if I think I'm going to go into the studio and work, that's just intimidating and hard to tell myself that it's okay for me to do. But what I can do sometimes is when I get up in the morning and I'm having my coffee before I do anything else, I can tell myself that it's okay to go in my studio and or in my workspace, wherever it is, and have a little bit of coffee while I just look and think about what I could do. And sometimes while I'm in there, then I can let myself do something for 10 minutes before I go do the dishes. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like sometimes trying to find a way to start a new habit, even if you don't do anything. I find for myself taking coffee in there and just thinking, I'm just going to think about it. Just going to think about it,
Just set a deadline.
Yeah.
Deadlines are magical. If you have to finish something by Thursday, man, you'll do it. At least I will.
Funny how that works.
Or
call it research, as you said in the beginning.
Yeah. Lindsay Webster, glad you're here.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see everyone. This is very beneficial today. I was thinking back on the process of productivity and which was brought up earlier. And I wonder if something that might benefit each of us, and certainly benefits me, is to understand that I took that bar of value in when I was very young, and it was survival mechanism probably from my parents and their parents and so forth. And then I've taken it in and it still becomes a borrowed value, my survival mechanism. So if I can understand that that's what it is, then I can begin to decide, is it something I want to include in my life? And where do I want to include it? And does it sometimes show up in places it doesn't belong? A little bit like you were saying with stitching on a quilt, you know, depending on what the quilt is for. But I think it's been valuable for me at any rate to embrace that this is a part of my being, and I can use it or it can use me. And so when it shows up, and I'm telling myself, you know, this doesn't mean anything, or I should be productive, I have an opportunity to review it and say, now, wait a minute. Do I value productivity? Yes. Where do I value it? Here and not there. So I guess a little bit like the archetypes, Jane, which is, you know, they're neither good nor bad. Productivity is neither good nor bad. But when is it benefiting me, and when is it getting in my way?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes total sense. I love that term, borrowed value, Lindsay. I think that's an important one to remember.
Oh, yeah. And we all are living by borrowed values. That's the human way. But a lot of times we don't recognize that's what it is, because it's kind of running the show in the background. So reviewing at least one benefits us, because then we begin to understand, oh, I see. It benefited me to be productive at some point in my life when I was small. And it benefited my parents to survive the Depression. You know what I mean? So it sort of gets more neutral that way.
Well, you can see where it really fits somebody else's life better than it's fitting yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes total sense. Like you said, our parents, like, they had to be productive. Like, they really didn't have a choice. So they're still being driven by that as a parent or whatever. They don't know that's what they're doing. But then we have the opportunity to really embrace that. Wow, you know, this benefits me in some ways too. Let me embrace where it benefits me and where it doesn't. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. Thanks. I will say we're a little bit past our 1 hour mark, and I know some people may need to go, and it's totally fine. We're glad you were here if you could stay, but we're going to stay through the last comments here. And Cynthia, I'd love to talk to you.
Okay, I got it unmuted. I was just going to say that your parents are very influential. My mother was very influential in the fact that she was a perfectionist. I didn't knit for 10 years because she was a big one on ripping out. If you even had one mistake, you had to rip that sucker out. And it just got to be too much. I had a perfect dress and that I had knitted, and it fit me too tight. And she was like, okay, you're going to rip this out and knit it over. I said, it's absolutely perfect. It's totally perfect. And no, you're going to rip it out. And I'm like, let's sell it. No, you're going to rip it out. And that was it for me. That was the crux. And so, I mean, she's always there. Don't get me wrong. I love my mother. I got very good habits from her, but I think it's very easy to get in those patterns with them. And my comment is, there's a Japanese philosophy that says if you do something for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, and do it the next day for 5 minutes and the next day for 5 minutes, it eventually becomes a habit. And it's just like, my house is a wreck. It's a wreck. And I'm not going to clean. That's something I've given up. I've given up cleaning. It's livable. That's, because I want to do other things. Other things are more important. And there's a quote that I saw one time, and it's really true. It says, nobody at the end of their life said that they should have worked more. And I think that's very true. You have your job that supports you and everything, but your art really supports you. Your creativity really supports you. So That's my
Yeah.
2 cents worth.
Well, that's worth a lot. And I think along those same lines, I can't recall anybody ever having said that I've never had anybody in anything I've ever done say, well, I'm really here because I just need to clean my house more often. And I can't figure out how to get that going. So there you go. Carla, one more comment?
Yes, I at the beginning of the pandemic, my studio was 10 miles from where I live, and I couldn't go to my studio, and then I got really sick. So I had to figure out what I could do to fill that time that was making me crazy. I was sitting on my couch instead of getting anything done. And I'm really terrible about having a routine, but something that I had never been able to do or had told people I couldn't do. I've done just about every medium on the planet, but I always said that I couldn't illustrate characters. I'm a good drawer and I can do realism very well, but people would say, oh, you should do a children's book. And I would always say, I can't do that kind of illustration. I'm not I can't do cartoons. I can't do, whatever I said I couldn't do. And I joined an illustration group on Facebook, and I was just kind of a voyeur for a while. And then they would do a prompt every day. And I finally and I ended up with 7 of like 8 by 10 illustrations. And I have so many ideas for books now. Doing something that I never ever thought I could do. And I look at them and I say, I can't believe I did those. Mm-hmm. It's stunning to me, absolutely stunning. And it really began as play once I let the criticism go. And then it became easier and easier. So each day I noticed that it took less and less time to do something that was very complex, or it would come through me and it was almost as if somebody else was doing the work. It was just fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, because I think that's essentially what we talk about when we talk about the overview of the cornerstones, in a sense, because what we end up with is confidence, and that confidence comes from putting in a little bit of time, and that's all it really takes. Mm-hmm. And that story of yours is just the perfect example of that, I think.
Yeah, and I've always been a teacher, so I was very good at helping other people do that. Yeah. But I had never sat down every day and just, given myself a space to do that, and to finish it each day.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to see those at some point. That sounds like fun. Well, we will wrap up now. We're grateful that you all have been here, and we actually had a brainstorm over the weekend that the exercise that we shared with you today would make a great 2-hour workshop. So are we crazy? I don't know. Probably. Anyhow, when we send out the link to this recording, we're going to send out information about that, which is going to happen on Saturday afternoon. And it'll be free to anybody in CST and a small fee for anybody who isn't in CST. But we just thought it would be we were having fun doing it. And I remembered how useful it was when I used to teach it quite some time ago. So if you're interested in getting the details on how to do that, basically morphing of an object so that you can begin to understand that aspect of abstraction, then keep in mind that we're doing that this week, and that'll be recorded too. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, hope you have a safe week. And we, as always, appreciate your willingness to sit with us and have these conversations. I think they benefit. Well, I know I get so much out of them, or we wouldn't do them if we weren't getting something out of them. Mm-hmm. So it's all good. Just stay safe and stay warm, or cool, based on where you are and what part of the world it is. Yeah. And we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Look forward to a play day.
Bye.